There we go. Hey, everybody. My name's Indy, and the gentleman all the way on the other end over there, that's Mr. J. Powell, and this is Indie Game Business. Hi. Today we have Renee Gittins from IGDA.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Hold on. I'm catching up. Sure enough, the minute
Jay says, go, and then, geez.
Well, the minute
hold on.
Show, Elsa comes over and wants to get in the house. So it's,
yeah.
It's a normal
Well,
day
you did
here.
say that before. It was like perfect timing.
I know, I did. It was crazy. So, Renee, welcome. We've got a lot to cover here because we're going to talk about, your indie studio for one, and the successful Kickstarter that you ran, which is doubly impressive given how hard it is to run Kickstarters these days. But we're also going to talk a lot about all the new stuff at the IGDA. My favorite new thing is the Discord server, which is awesome. Let's get started where we always start. And so tell us how you originally got into the industry and walk us through your career, up to now.
Yeah, certainly. That's quite the winding path for me in particular. So I've always been a gamer my whole life. I think my dad first turned me on to Wolfenstein 3D when I was about 5 years old. And I really ended up falling in love with video games from that point. However, I didn't realize that a career in game development was possible for me until I was already in my senior year of college. At that time, I ended up meeting with some game developers and realizing, oh my goodness, this is a career I could actually do. However, I was graduating that year with a degree in engineering with a focus in mechanical engineering and project management, which doesn't really set you up necessarily for a game career. So I ended up entering the field that I had planned on going into, biotechnology. And in the biotechnology field, I was able to start teaching myself programming on the side. And then I switched over from being a system and design engineer to a software development engineer. And then while I was doing that, I started doing work for an indie studio on the side, pro bono. First as a producer and then as a server developer and producer. And I really fell in love with games in the game industry. I was based in Seattle at the time, which has a really vibrant community, both indie game and AAA and up. So I was able to learn a lot from that community and become really involved. I joined the IGDA. I started going to industry events constantly, but I was still having a really hard time getting hired. I was a few years out of college. I didn't have as much direct experience as a lot of people who were my age, and it was a little harder to compete with college grads. So I ended up deciding to make my own portfolio. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to make or if I wanted to be a programmer or a designer or a producer. So I decided to draft out the design of a game. And that game ended up becoming my game, Poachers: A Curious Tale. Once I had the design drafted out, I actually started working in C++ to build out the crafting system before attending my first Unite, where I became very experienced with Unity and decided to move my prototype over into Unity. After doing that, I noticed that as I attended these various video game networking events and conferences and conventions, I was getting a lot of attention about the design of Poachers: A Curious Tale, and I eventually decided that I would go full effort into it and ramp it up to a Kickstarter. Well, so I founded my company in 2014. I had a successful Kickstarter a year after that, and now I've been working on developing the game. And my game career also has taken off since then, showing that I had the ability to run something successful like a Kickstarter, that I was creating viable game types, and that I had the wide skill set required for that allowed me to work in various different positions in the game industry. And when I say various, I do mean quite varied. I've been a marketing coordinator for Xbox Live Games for Gold. I've been a technical project or products manager at Within, a VR AR company. I've been a system or a I can't even remember my own title, a system architect for Spirit AI. And most recently, after being on the executive board of directors for 2.5 years and 2 years on the Seattle board of directors prior, I have joined the IGDA as the executive director.
That's the classic case of, if you're not going to give me a job, I'm going to make my own job.
It's funny because when you do that, then the jobs start flowing. It really is the best approach.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, and that's awful. And trust me, you were much better equipped coming out of college than I was with my English literature degree. So at least you did something in remotely engineering base of something that's going to give you a little bit more head up on everything. So let's talk about the Kickstarter first, because like I said, the market today makes it extremely difficult to come in and run a successful Kickstarter. So how much money did you go for initially? What was the goal?
I asked for $64,000.
Nice. Was a very specific number there.
$64,000 was pretty well thought out. I was looking for an amount that wouldn't necessarily compensate myself, but would fully compensate a team, as well as for any of the physical backer rewards. That was taking into account taxes, which were quite high, particularly being based in Washington State, which has, I believe, the highest sales tax in the US. And it was a consideration of what I truly needed to get a story-based game with a lot of content complete, when I was only going to be doing the design and programming, which means I needed to hire contractors for their art and assets. So audio and art were really where I was looking at a lot of those funds going to, with any excess funds, of course, going to supplement software and other sorts of expenses. And if there was anything left for myself, but I think that it's budgeted pretty well. So all that money is really going straight into that development.
So what level of resource, where did you go to come up with, that budget? Was it just basically from the project plan, from the team? And what sort of backer rewards did you choose to use, and which ones did you not? Because that's where we see a lot of studios get in trouble, is with their backer rewards.
Right. So I actually did approximately a year of research on Kickstarter before launching my Kickstarter, including looking at other Kickstarter postmortems, talking to friends who had run Kickstarters, and really just trying to glean all of the best information I could before creating my campaign. One of the things that I found was there were a lot of issues when it came to physical rewards. So I made sure that all of the tiers that I had physical rewards for were actually the greater tiers. I do not believe I had any physical rewards for under $100, except for an early bird tier for one of those $100 tiers.
And when it comes to how much of a community did you have before you started the Kickstarter? Because that's what we hear a lot, is you can't just go and run a Kickstarter like we used to run them.
Right.
Have a community built up.
Yeah, that's completely true. So I ran my Kickstarter in 2015, which is certainly after the heyday of Kickstarter. I think Kickstarters were maxed out around 2012. And so I think there was only 8% of games being funded as successfully in 2015 when I ran my Kickstarter. So I'm very lucky to be one of the few that was successful that year. Since I spent almost an entire year planning and ramping up, knowing that I was going to do this Kickstarter, I started marketing and building up a community over that year. I will admit that much of the community that I built was actually fellow game developers, more so than other pure fans. I worked very hard at marketing myself and my company and my game within game communities and game development communities, which ended up being quite successful because I was able to get a lot of indie game developers to share my game when I launched the Kickstarter with their own audiences. And because I had that network of indie game developers and other game developers, when they shared and promoted my Kickstarter, it reached their audiences, which really magnified that effort.
So, given that it was the majority of developers that you were actually building up with that community, did you get sort of a wave effect to their fans, or because typically it's like I see people all the time asking me to like their Facebook page as a game developer company, but I'm like, that's not really going to do you a whole lot of good because I'm not your target market. So how did that correspond, and how did that translate into consumer interest, or were the majority of your backers just other developers?
I would say maybe 20 to 30% of backers. Whoops, one sec. My computer is trying to go to sleep. I would say probably 20 to 30% of my backers were game developers, which I think is actually quite a high amount when you consider the average game developer per 1,000 people is probably around one. But I really do think that their communities provided a lot of support for me. I had some really big indie names like Rami Ismail and some other indie developers sharing and talking about Potions: A Curious Tale. And they have networks of, 50,000 plus people who are passionate about indie games. And I think that really brought in a lot of my backers. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to track the exact routes of that based on the types of analytics I was using. I can only see really the platforms they were coming from, not necessarily the exact posts.
So, and I'm on the Kickstarter page now, just taking a look at everything. How is the development coming along? And now that you've got the funding that you needed via Kickstarter, are you looking at anything like, green light with Steam or something along those lines?
So we're actually already approved through Steam. Before they had the solidified greenlight process, I was able to get the game on Steam and through their verification. Mm-hmm. That was also probably due to living in Seattle because I just pestered someone I knew at Valve.
Go stand outside the office until they go ahead and greenlight it?
Something like that. Actually, one of my first game conferences that I attended was the first Steam Dev Days. So I was very lucky to meet a really vibrant, again, indie and smaller developer audience there. But sorry, I forgot your question.
No, this is the way the show goes anyway, so don't worry too much about it. How basically are you going to look to doing anything like early access in addition to the Kickstarter funding?
No, I don't plan on doing that. I think that we have enough funds to take us through the end of development. Development has been slow and slightly slower than I had predicted due to the fact that all of the people who contribute on the project are doing so part-time while working other roles. This allows them to contribute their time at a rate which I can fund with the funds we have, though it means that assets come in at a slower rate than sometimes I would like. So generally, the game's development is ahead of the asset creation. Like right now, I would say if we were to break the game down into 9 chapters, I am at least a chapter and a half ahead of the art assets in terms of the game development. And we're entering those final 3 chapters right now.
So what was the one thing that you did in preparation for or during the Kickstarter that was the most effective?
I think was having a planned media schedule. I really planned out ahead of time aggressive marketing of the game. That includes setting up podcasts and interviews and pre-writing articles and blogs, both ones that were directly related to the game and that were somewhat related to the game's development, to reach all kinds of audiences. I also planned out promotional assets and videos and other types of little snippets to make sure I had really sort of a backlog of things that I could pull at and throw onto social media any given day. And that sort of kept the hype building and made sure that I was reaching the maximum audience possible. During the Kickstarter itself, and probably about 4 to 8 weeks in front of it, ahead of it, I was working around 80 hours a week. I was sort of putting my heart and soul every day into really making sure that this was going to be a success. And certainly it paid off, but it was only because I had the ability to put all my time into it that I was able to do that.
Hey, Jay, I got to break in real quick. Can you fix the title? It says how to run a successful and how the IGDA can help. It doesn't say Kickstarter in there.
That's interesting.
Dum dum dum. Everybody wants to know how to run a successful.
We can run a successful many of things.
Yeah, we can run a successful all the things.
A successful team.
All the things.
Oops. So when you do, I mean, it's very impressive that you went to all that work beforehand, because that's what we see a lot of developers not doing. But building that marketing, building that content pipeline, where did you go to, get a template for that, or how did you figure it out? What did that, basically how much stuff was in it? How many social media casts did you go to?
Truthfully, I think it's really hard to set a limit. Like, okay, if I have 20 pictures, we'll be successful. Because that's not really the case. It depends a lot on how viral your marketing ends up being. Mine was not particularly viral. I even actually ended up having Total Biscuit cover the game. And that surprisingly ended up into maybe 100 profile.
Something is happening.
I mean, the success of your really did. There's some media lists, some video game media lists floating around that you can find, and I set up a bot to email every single person on that list with a nice, personalized, very friendly email, and I maybe got 10 hits back for 2,000 emails sent. And I looked up creators, particularly smaller YouTube creators, because they have a better response rate. I was reaching out to people who had channels that were covering games along the lines of Poachers. So if they were doing things like Animal Farm or Minecraft, or things that were kind of crafty, could potentially appeal to a younger audience, a little on the cute side, or if they were covering something like Zelda a lot. That all fits very well into the Potions of Curious Tale market. So I made sure to give a bit extra effort when reaching out to those audiences that I knew were likely to be my audience, or to those people who had audiences that I thought would overlap with mine a lot. When it came to actual asset creation, such as promotional images, for the most part, I just pumped out as many as my brain could figure out to make cute and interesting, while having art by itself that showed the game or some concepts from the game is nice. I actually focused a lot on making potion-based puns. And so I had all of these images with items from the game and then puns that went with it. and I think those are actually quite effective because people found them somewhat funny. But I really sort of left no stone unturned when it came to pursuing marketing. I did dev blogs. I posted on Reddit in communities where I had Easter eggs planned for the game that appealed to their audiences. Yeah, right.
Damn, Renee.
Again, the Reddit community, there's one Reddit community called Imaginary Witches, where people share pictures of witches. And since the main character of Poachers and Curious Tale is a witch, I made sure to share art of her in that community and then include a comment about the game and the Kickstarter.
See, this is perfect because this is what we talk about so much. When it comes to indie marketing of games, it's not just that you post in the game dev or the indie dev subreddit. It's finding these ancillary communities that you can be a part of, whether it's witches or whatever subreddit out there is in charge of making potions, things like that. That's the level that you have to go to bring in the meat of a lot of the companies you're going to, because you got to admit, you were probably the only game to post on American Witches, Imaginary Witches, for a while. Whereas
forever, probably.
You post your Kickstarter in the game dev subreddit, and it's like, okay, it's another Kickstarter with 5 or 6 of those. And we've known for years basically that the traditional media doesn't cover Kickstarters anymore unless it's something completely monumental or has people with a ton of experience involved in it. It has to have a really, really special hook for the traditional media to cover it.
And for traditional media, I actually took a completely different approach. When I was reaching out to traditional media, I wasn't trying to pitch an indie game, Potions: A Curious Tale. I was trying to pitch a story of a young female developer making a game about a young girl that would appeal to female audiences. That's a much easier story for them to write about, and a much more unique story that gets more clicks. And in fact, I did receive a number of articles along those lines when I was pitching that story to that the more traditional media.
That's actually another good point that we can get into. Getting some of these media outlets to cover your Kickstarter, you're not going to be able to just write up a press release and then send it in and hope it gets picked up, because it won't be picked up. And you and I talked about this, before our last virtual conference too. You have to build a story around why your game is special, other than the fact that you're just making a game. And
Absolutely.
So to walk us through a little bit of how you did that and how you spun it to make it interesting for sites that normally wouldn't care.
And so one of the things I did was I looked at the game itself that I was making and tried to figure out where my biggest audience was. I actually thought that my biggest audience would be in the slightly older gamers who really grew up with the original Legend of Zelda and similar games, because the gameplay is actually quite similar to that. However, when I demoed the game at Geek Girl Con, I actually noticed that young female gamers were the ones who found the most appeal and were actually the most excited audience. So I knew that probably a good target audience for any media on that front would be either young gamers who are really hard to reach unless you're going through their YouTube stars, and their parents. And so what do parents find appealing about video game? Oh, that's much more rough of an area. A lot of parents don't like video games, even probably more so with Fortnite and its popularity. But they do like women in STEMs, women in technology, girls trying to be more on the scientific and mathematic and technology side in general. So creating a story around that uplifts the concept of women in technology and also has a game with a character who's uplifting a strong, independent young girl being creative and intelligent with her choices. Potions: A Curious Tale, I didn't describe this, is actually the elevator pitch for it is Potions: A Curious Tale is an adventure crafting game where combat's not always the answer. You play as a young witch named Luna who's recently discovered her ability to brew magical potions. And she can use these potions as spells to battle monsters, overcome obstacles, and solve puzzles on her quest to become a potions master. In that summary itself, it focuses a lot on Luna being a young girl and using her wit and potions to overcome obstacles and puzzles, and that combat's not always the answer. A lot of these words not only make the game unique, but make it appeal a lot to that parent audience that might want to have their young girls or young boys play a game that promotes those kind of values.
So does potion making actually fall under STEM, or should there be a P in there somewhere?
I I think that the crafting system itself is kind of a puzzle. It has this elemental aspect where you're trying to add up ingredients that have certain elements so you can get elemental combinations to create a potion, which is a very logical, mathematical kind of puzzle. So that is, I would say, on the STEM side. And then for the actual ingredients in the game, many of the ingredients are from either real life herbs and ingredients or from popular legends and lore. And all of the descriptions of the ingredients sort of note that kind of history. So as you're playing the game, it's not in your face, but you're actually learning a lot.
See, that's what we need is things like that teach chemistry, and what we don't need is people going out and trying it once they do it. But there's subtle ways of teaching these things that I think a lot of educational games kind of miss out on. So I was in India the other week for the Indian Game Developer Conference, and I met a company that has they do board games and they're moving into video games, but you look at the board games and they're all educational. They're teaching math and science, but you wouldn't know it by looking at it because it doesn't look like an educational game. And so that's what, being able to use games like yours to teach these things, I love. It's fantastic because, no matter how much education you stack in a game, if it's not fun, nobody's going to play it.
Right.
So, that's all right. So to recap with my brain, because I've been letting the dog in and out, it was very important early on to build that community, even though it was majority of game developers, because then you get access to their community as well. But also you spent a lot of time preloading basically, your marketing angles and looking into different ways you can go and approach these communities without alienating them and feel like they're coming in from right field somewhere. And that goes along with everything we still see now. It takes a lot of early preparation and planning throughout the process to keep everybody engaged. So if you're out there, if you're watching on, Twitch or YouTube or Mixer or wherever you are, and you have questions for Renee along the Kickstarter line, absolutely let us know. Drop them in chat. We'll see it. We'll get your questions answered. So let's shift gears a little bit. Now, in addition to making a game, you're also executive director of the IGDA. And
that's correct.
There's been several things that are new going on with the IGDA. How can the IGDA help developers in a similar situation? As they're going into Kickstarter, let's tweak it a little bit in that direction, and we'll talk about the new stuff at the IGDA. But how can these studios get a benefit from an IGDA membership as they're going and doing crowdfunding?
Right. There's actually so many paths that cross when it comes in between the preparation for a Kickstarter and what the IGDA offers. The IGDA has an active community of thousands and thousands of developers. We have over 12,000 paying members, in addition to over 100,000 game developers on our various social media. And not only do we have larger groups such as the IGDA itself, but we also have individual chapters, which are local chapters such as IGDA Seattle or IGDA Kansai, or even IGDA Pakistan, that run their own events. And it was attending those events before my Kickstarter in Seattle, under IGDA Seattle, that I met a lot of game developers. They really host these wonderful events where you can network and build your community. And in fact, that's actually where I got a number of the members on my team as well. In addition to chapters, the IGDA has special interest groups. Not only do we have an indie special interest group where you can talk to other indie developers about their experiences and their knowledge and any recommendations, but they also have special interest groups for particular disciplines and even for representation and advocacy for minority groups. So we have women in games, we have quality assurance, we have game designers and game writers. All of those are really, really wonderful resources, not only for you to get information, but for you to share your successes and to build up that interested game developer community who not only can promote your Kickstarter, but can provide you with valuable feedback and information to make sure that you're really putting the best product forward that you can. One of the other types of self-promotion that I made a lot of use of in ramping up to my Kickstarter campaign was doing dev blogs, talks, and creating articles. And all of those can be promoted through the IGDA as well. Not only can you go to an IGDA chapter and offer to do a talk at one of their events, but you can also share your resources with the IGDA community. And if you write something formal, like a white paper or a more in-depth article, you can share that on the IGDA resource library, where it will become a resource for all game developers to use that will also put more, notoriety to your name and to make you a more credible game developer.
So one of the things that I've noticed in the last couple of months that I actually really love, because so much of my life now revolves around Discord, you have an honest to God Discord server now. And so that was, the IGDA is so big that was a lot of the hurdle that, I faced, and I've been doing this for 20 some years, in terms of getting the knowledge out there or, asking other developers. There was really no way other than emails to get a hold and to tap some of this knowledge. And so now with the Discord server, everybody is right there, and you have a ton of channels.
We do. We have ones for project sharing and for asking advice, and all of those are really, really good places to go, promote yourself or get information that you can use to help your game be better. And also in our main Discord, you can also find all of our chapters and special interest groups and do an initial reach out to them. And of course, we actually just relaunched our website 2 weeks ago as well. So our website is really easy to navigate now. It has contact forms, so you can directly reach out to these groups without having to send mass emails to the IGDA HQ. And really make sure that you're getting in touch with the people who have specialties and interests in helping you.
And see, that's where everything comes together for me, is because it's wonderful that all these people are interested, but to be able to have a place where everybody can come chat now, it's very, very nice. And so just search on Discord. If you need access to the server, search on Discord for IGDA. It's pretty self-explanatory at that point. So what are some of the other new things that are going on with the IGDA in ways that, you can help developers beyond, just crowdfunding and Kickstarter stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So we've done a lot of improvements to the types of benefits that we offer both our members and our affiliates. If you're a small studio affiliation with the IGDA is only $200 a year. And for that $200 a year, you actually get a ton of promotion. We send out your articles in our insider that reaches 28,000 developers. We're happy to share your successes on social media, and that really gives you a huge outreach. I believe we have like 74,000 followers on Twitter alone. So that can help really magnify your message and also give you access to a lot of very valuable resources. So if you're familiar with NPD, the research group, we actually just established a relation with them where we're providing a lot of data and information that they normally price quite heavily to free for our membership. So if you're an IGDA member and go to our resource library, we now have some resources that you can access that are only for membership, but it's just so you can get access to these really exclusive, really valuable business information that can help you understand trends so you know your market better when you're preparing a campaign. And then, of course, we are working on expanding our resource library, both the member exclusive and the public one, which is huge, a lot. So if you do have interest and you're passionate about a subject, or you want to talk about how you can implement a really interesting game development workflow in Unity, but use your own game as an example in that, that's the kind of resources and information that would be great for us to include in that library, and that will promote you and your game very well.
So where does one go to submit that? I mean, assuming one has a buttload of white papers on the business side of the industry that are just sitting in a folder somewhere, not really doing anything. Hypothetically, where should that person send those?
Yeah, hypothetically, you just have to email us at info@igda.org.
Okay. Done. And so, and to go back to one thing that you mentioned right there, it's important for developers to not only share their successes, it's I would say even more important to share your failures, because and people don't want to do that, but you always learn more from a failure than you do from a success. And so being able to share that type of knowledge, this is what we did and this is why it went wrong, that sort of stuff, that is absolutely key to helping all these other developers around too. So for the developers out there, don't feel like you should only be sharing your successes. You should absolutely be sharing your failures, and don't stress on that too much, because I guarantee you 90% of the other people out there are going through some of the same stuff. And so getting everyone together and being able to discuss that's going to help the entire global development community get better and better and better.
Definitely. I know that people really appreciate postmortems. And a postmortem that's purely successes is definitely not as informative as a postmortem that has failures and recommendations. So if you have those experiences, writing them up will not only help other developers avoid the same pitfalls, but will also promote you.
So let's go back to your Kickstarter then. What happened that didn't work well, and what did you not do that you wish you had?
I wish that I had created more audio and video assets. Those were of a greater expense, but I think that they do better communication with audiences when you can get them to invest enough into watching that. Even though I spent a lot of time preparing for the Kickstarter itself, I think I could have probably held off on doing some of the asset work a bit longer. I had pushed forward a lot of asset creation purely to benefit the Kickstarter, and then had to do some recreation of a number of those assets to make better sense for development. So the main one that you'll probably notice if you look through our Kickstarter updates is that we had a square tile set that we actually ended up changing to a hex tile set because it worked a lot better for the visuals and development of our game. I think if we had spent a little bit more time looking into that prior to the Kickstarter, it would have made for more appealing assets. So I think our game looks a lot more beautiful now than it did for our Kickstarter, which would have probably encouraged more backers.
And that's what we see too. It's a lot about the visual, which makes it more difficult as an early stage project because your visuals aren't remotely final.
Right, especially as I'm not an artist.
Yeah.
It would have been one thing if I could have locked myself in a room and made some gorgeous stuff to promote my game, but I was actually I am very passionate about paying people for their work. So I was paying people out of pocket, and I had limited pockets, clearly, particularly before the Kickstarter. So that was a bit more strenuous, perhaps, than it should have been, with a bit more pre-planning and preparation.
So did you see more response and more engagement on things like Instagram than you did on Twitter?
I didn't actually see a lot of response on Instagram. I saw much more traction on Twitter, but I think that might have been due in part to an already established Twitter community that I had and that I made use of. I didn't have that when it came to Instagram. I do think that the more targeted outreaches to those smaller communities, those smaller non-game development or game communities in general, were the most effective. As you said, if you're in an indie game community, you see tons of indie games all the time. But if you're in a witches community, you don't see many games. So there's a lot more interest when one finally shows up.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And we've done that for years as well on our games. We actually, back earlier in my career when I was doing development and publishing, we had 2 PR firms for a project, one for the game industry and then one for other traditional media that was not the game industry to bring in things, like that, communities or magazines or articles or websites or whoever that, pull from the periphery. And so it is, I think it's something that developers very much overlook or don't even think about, but it's something that's super, super, super important.
Right.
We got a question from chat. If you want to answer from Deicides, does it make sense to put free-to-play games like Warframe, Path of Exile on Kickstarter with supporter pledge levels? That's a good question.
Well, let's see. Path of Exile and Warframe are a bit larger than I'm with when it comes to Kickstarter, but I think that there is an appeal to doing that because it is a good way to gauge market interest prior to committing to a large amount of development, and it's a good way to ensure that there are funds up front to support the development of exclusive or additional content. When you have a passionate fan base, I think tapping into them and seeing if they have interests in a new component or a new route can be beneficial and can really help developers pursue new content that they wouldn't have necessarily had the funds or certainty to pursue otherwise.
It's not just games the size of Warframe, but free-to-play in general. I think there's a lot of developers who are extremely reticent to run a Kickstarter for a free-to-play game because it gets into the whole, are you paying for content and it's supposed to be free? But there's all sorts of incentives that you can do for a free-to-play game on Kickstarter that are just as useful as, for a premium game. And the other thing is, if you've got a good community built on Discord or through a Kickstarter or whatever, if you end up looking for a publisher later, which odds are you will, it helps with finding that publisher when you can say, we already have this passionate community behind us. Don't get too wrapped up in a lot of the vocal minority that you hear that just raises hell the minute you go from a Kickstarter to having a publisher, because it's a reality of the industry. And at the end of the day, they're still, the passionate ones are still going to support you. But you have to always remember that this is a business, just like everything else. You're going to have to make those choices down the road, and being able to do whatever you can to build the community around your game, be it on, social media or Discord or Kickstarter, is going to help you in the end, one way or another. So yeah, I mean, I'm with Renee. I mean, I think it certainly makes sense to do free-to-play games on Kickstarter. Just make sure you got that community built up as much as you can before you go out there.
So one of the reasons I pursued Kickstarter instead of other funding options is because the benefit of going the Kickstarter route is creative control. And the more public support you can get from individual backers, the more creative control you can maintain to make sure that what you are producing is along the creative lines that you want to pursue and that the backers who support you want to pursue. Whereas if you were to go a more traditional route with a publisher up front, you might have to change your trajectory or like the product that you want to make. And so, that's one of the reasons that I find Kickstarter so valuable and why I pursued it as the main funding for Potions.
So we got another question, but before we hit it, why Kickstarter instead of Indiegogo?
Just at the time that I was doing it, Kickstarter had more trust from a wider community. And I especially thought if I was going to be potentially appealing to parents who are not gamers, having Kickstarter was a much more recognizable website and product than Indiegogo at the time, particularly for that non-strong gamer audience.
Okay. I'm always curious, because the big difference, of course, is you get whatever you get with Indiegogo, but you've got to hit that target on Kickstarter to get it.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that because of that, people have more confidence in Kickstarter projects, that they think that, I mean, it is much easier to say, I will make a game with $60,000 than I will make a game and I want $60,000 for it, but I'll try to make it with less than that. Like,
We'll do something super, super simple.
Yeah.
So, Andy, what was the next question?
Next question is for Renee. What is your experience with physical rewards on Kickstarter and shipping? Did you find they were worth it? And what are your thoughts behind it and fans' thoughts behind it?
So we only have slightly under a quarter of our audience receiving physical rewards. And for me, it's a huge relief because fulfilling Kickstarter physical rewards can be a monumentous task, and making sure that those Kickstarter rewards are priced high enough that it makes sense to take on that kind of effort, I think is very vital to maintaining not only sanity, but financial success right as you're shipping your game. So that's something that I had a really big consideration in when figuring this out. I have not shipped my physical rewards yet, but I have not only planned out the costs of that, the shipping costs, the packing costs, as well as fluctuation of those costs as shipping and things do go up over time. But I made sure that there was actually enough padding in those rewards that any change would not cause me to say, oh no, like we're only bringing in 5% of this backer's money to the game because 95% is being spent on the physical reward. I tried to keep physical rewards closer to 20 to 25% of the value of any tier.
Again, tons of like forethought into all of this.
Yeah, I had spreadsheets. I have spreadsheets.
We couldn't tell at all that
pre-planning was part of the success, and I think that pre-planning is reflected in the Kickstarter itself. We might not always have the most polished assets, but the reward tiers and the outlay of everything and the explanations, I think, gave a lot of people confidence. Particularly in a time when Kickstarter and Kickstarter games were being viewed with a lot of uncertainty.
Was that about the time of Star Citizen?
Yeah, it was around there. It was sort of like the mass failure of a lot of large Kickstarter titles, I think, in like 2013, 2014. So there was...
Here's what I don't get, and I know you can say limited things given that you run the IGDA, but the news came out yesterday, or maybe Monday, that $250 million has been put into that game.
Yeah, I did see that news.
That is absolutely crazy. I mean, in a good way, God knows they're doing something right. You know, whether you think the game's ever going to be finished or not, they're doing something right to be able to raise all of that. But we'll say using that as an example, Renee, are you going to like pre-create potions that are going to be sold later for like thousands of dollars up front?
No, there's no plans for any DLC or in-game purchases or even in-game exclusive items. The game is the game, and that was a decision that I made with a lot of consideration. I think that having a story-based game where it's not multiplayer, it means a lot of the potential in-game rewards would either take away from the design of the game or someone's experience of it. I really want to make sure everyone's experiencing the game in its fullest, best form. And so having additional in-game rewards or download content didn't quite make sense to me. Now, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, what would Potions 2 be? Or how can I use all of these tools I've created to make other games? Because I did make everything extremely modular, so I can reuse a lot of these assets to make either a game that's quite similar or that's fairly different as well. And so that's what I would be looking towards for creating anything additional, would probably just be a completely separate game.
We were just chatting yesterday on our Discord server about, you know, general tips for business, and you know, our good friend Tom Biscaglia, you know, posted, you know, design creep will kill a game. You know,
absolutely.
You have to be able to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to save that for the sequel or for the DLC or something along those lines. You can't just, you know, jump in and say, yeah, let's just add that next. Let's add this next. It will absolutely torpedo your project.
Right. Potions has only gone in the opposite direction.
That's good.
Design, I've only cut things and not added to them. There's been some like fairly large changes. The crafting system did get a major overhaul to get into the elemental crafting. But that's because of playtesting. We discovered that people weren't able to make as many potions as they would try, and they really liked experimenting. So we wanted to encourage experimentation and make sure that if they were throwing a bunch of ingredients into the vat, that they're getting something out a lot of the time.
So how many, this is just my curiosity, how many potions are in the game?
There's going to be well over 100.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, having a modular system makes those a lot easier to design. So I can create an effect that has multiple sub-effects and then throw those on a potion, and then take those combinations of sub-effects, change their elemental type, and throw them in a different combination on a different potion. I can also control whether it's going to be just a circular AoE or if it's more of a cone effect. So it adds a lot of variety with the base components without me having to program, you know, over 100 separate things.
we can't tell at all that you're trained as an engineer.
I was a self-taught programmer. I only took one introduction class my freshman year and one introduction class my senior year in programming, and those gave me the very basic components of programming. So if anyone's interested in picking that up, especially if you want to be a game designer, understanding programming is very key.
So now that you've done the Kickstarter, the game is in development. We talked a little bit about early access, but are there any other, I don't know, secondary, I mean, this is the whole Star Citizen thing, any other like secondary funding options that you're looking at?
No, I mean, these days I am pretty confident on launching with the amount of funds that we have left. If there's any additional funds that are needed, I'll just supply that out of pocket. I'm also having now a more successful game career. Can't say I'm making as much money in nonprofit now as I was being a technical manager, but I was able to be careful with my funds and make sure that I personally have a backup to support the game, to ensure that everyone gets the product they were promised and the rewards they were promised.
Look, you're being, because you've got a lot more pressure on you now. I mean, you're very much in a formal professional setting. It's going to go much poorer for you if it goes bad as the IGDA director than if you were just another developer out there. I mean, has that put a different level of stress on you?
No, it hasn't. I'm fairly confident in shipping the product that I promised. I'm really doing the best to make it everything that I think it should be in terms of both game and story. We're going to be launching our alpha soon, which will be going to backers who have backed at levels that grant them alpha access. And a lot of those backers are game developers, and I hope that they will be giving me valuable feedback and making sure that I really do tune this game to be the most enjoyable possible. And I must say, play testing is absolutely the most valuable thing you can do when you're working on a game. And we're actually going to be demoing Poachers in the pre-alpha state at MagFest at the start of January. So if you're interested in play testing, I want to stare at you as you play my game.
And so, we'll be back in 9 months. We'll have Renee as we talk about the game that has turned into a hyper-casual game because we've had to cut so much stuff out of it to get it to ship, right? So, I had another question, and I completely...
Well, there's a question in chat right here. It says, I might have missed what she said, but did she say where most of her Kickstarter supporters came from, if she relied on a publisher/PR campaign?
Yeah, I mean, what I said before is most of my Kickstarter backers came through the network of game developers that I had developed coming up to the Kickstarter campaign. So a lot of, I think, like I said, 20 to 30% of my backers were actually game developers, and then a lot of other backers were through their communities. I did not do any funds outside of Kickstarter. The only other funds were supplied by myself out of pocket.
All right, I remember my question, and for whoever posted that question, there's one article that I always point folks to on Gama Sutra from Justin French, who was on the show a couple of months ago, and he talks about how to build that community around Discord and a lot of places like that, but how important it is for you to do it. So I just posted that in chat, but you can go for those of you on the podcast, you can go to just go to Gama Sutra and search for Justin French, and his articles will come up. So now that you're in phase 2, so to speak, the next thing that we always hear from developers, and we've always seen from data, is it's all about getting those wish lists on Steam. how have you tackled that, or have you yet?
I haven't really tackled that. I've had my Steam page up for as long as the Kickstarter, actually a little bit before the Kickstarter. So people have been able to wishlist the game, but I haven't done strong promotion on that grounds yet, because after the Kickstarter was successful, I wanted to do sort of a mental reset for my marketing before pushing forward it again. And one of the best pieces of marketing feedback that I've received is marketing is most effective when you have an action for someone to complete. And while completing the action of putting the game on their wish list is a good action, I think the action that I want to be more focused on is the actual purchasing of the game.
That generally helps.
So I do plan to do a marketing push when the game comes out. And I'm going to be slowly building up. Actually, I've started ramping up the marketing again in anticipation of it shipping. I was hoping at the beginning of summer, but due to asset rates, I think it's going to be the end of summer in 2020. But I do really want to hit, hey, Potions is live by it. Because I don't think that I'm going to be getting as much normal game media attention as many games. As we say, that's a very crowded space. So I'm going to be looking at pushing that forward and then going the more traditional media route with the stories and reaching out to those normally untapped audiences of parents and people who might see Potions as the first game they play as much as a continuation of their already growing game collection. It does appeal a lot, and it does play a lot like Zelda in many ways, so there's certainly that kind of game audience I want to appeal to, but I don't think that building up them right now on the wish list is going to be that effective, particularly because it's the gameplay that will speak to them much more than the art assets, and people tend to look at static art assets.
Well, Below the Stone Dev just wish listed the game, so you got that going for
Woo!
you.
Great, thank you so much.
We posted the link to the Steam page in our chat there. So if you want to go see it, there it is. And I'm like furiously posting it into my notes. So when we put the podcast info out there, we'll have that link for you as well.
Great, thank you so much.
That's what we're here for. So we've got just a few minutes left. If you've got questions for Renee, either about Kickstarters and crowdfunding or about the IGDA, obviously, throw them up in chat now and we'll get them answered. But with the last couple of minutes while we wait to see there, what other aspects of what you're doing now and what the IGDA is doing now do you feel are the most pertinent for developers out there? What's the big thing that's helping right now?
Right. I mean, the two things that I'm really trying to work on building up right now is the community and the support of game developers as individuals, and our resource library and the resources that we provide them to improve their lives and their careers. And we are getting so much more valuable resources every day. We're providing new benefits every day. I mean, we're about to, or have just published our GDC discounts for our members, which is, I think, up to like $700 on the max level passes. And for a $60 a year membership, that can come out $640 a head, which is not too bad. I think that even if you don't want to commit to being an IGDA member, I would recommend looking into the community, because most of our communities are open to anyone, IGA members or not, and it's really a valuable place to find resources, get advice, and share your successes and failures and projects with a community who will be interested and engaged.
So, do you need to be a member to join the Discord?
You do not, but you get a colorful name if you are.
I'll post that one up there too. So the IGDA Discord is discord.gg/IGDA.
Yep.
And our Discord, if you want to talk to me or Indy or Renee or any of the other guests that have been on the show, you can go to discord.gg/indiegamebusiness and join over 600 other developers, publishers, marketing teams, hobbyists, etc. There. That's whole Discord is built for the business side of it. I still laugh that, Indy told me a year ago I needed to make a Discord for the show, and I was like, why? And now we have like 600 and some studios on there.
Yeah, I think in the month since we launched IGDA's Discord, we've hit over 1,000 game developers, and it's been really such a vibrant community, and it's been definitely an invaluable tool and resource. So I'm super glad that we've ramped that up. And I think that having those online communities where you can really network and connect with people is super valuable, not only to your personal growth, but to your personal brand.
Yeah, it is. It's getting the name out there. Even if you do posts on, Gama Sutra or whatever, there's a lot to be said for, making yourself and building yourself up to be an expert in some way, shape, or form, whether you are or not. I mean, because it's like we said earlier, you can be a first-time developer and share, what you learned as a post-mortem on something that failed, and you're going to most likely get more traffic from that than you are of here's a breakdown of everything that we did right. It's very important for us as a community to share the good and the bad. So, Renee, thank you very much for coming on and going through all of this. We highly appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
There was one more. There was a question from DSI. Says, "Are you working with conferences outside of the U.S. as well, like EGX or Gamescom?"
Oh, we are. We not only are working to host mentor cafes at many conferences, you'll find discounts for IGA members on basically every single game conference that we're aware that exists. So I think it's actually hundreds of game conferences every year where IGA members get a discount. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, we have conference discounts for conferences across the US, Europe, Africa, South America, Japan. We work with everyone we can to make sure that we're giving member benefits to everyone.
So, mentor cafes, and that's something that we've only seen like in the last couple of years from a lot of these shows. Why are we only using those at shows? What if we just did virtual mentor cafes as well?
We've looked into virtual mentor cafes and that approach. It has actually a much higher overhead when it comes to pre-planning and running those. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on. But if you're looking for mentorship on a virtual basis, we would really direct you to our special interest groups where you can directly connect with people who are working in the fields you're interested in and get advice from them. What we feel is a really good appeal of mentor cafes is that person-to-person, in-person interaction.
So let's talk about that afterwards. I have ideas. Anyway, all right. So, thanks a ton. We'll get this, downloaded and posted up on our podcast page shortly, either this evening or early next morning, and you can hear all the episodes. Just go to anchor.fm/indiegamebusiness, and there's about 11 or 12 different platforms you can choose from. Take us with you on the go. I saw somebody was actually listening to us on their commute the other morning, and I was like, "Aw." So yeah, that's about Indy. Is there anything else I'm missing? Because I'm sure there is.
Oh, isn't there? Is there a way for people to sign up for the newsletter?
Yes, just go to the powergroupconsulting.com and you'll get a handy dandy little pop-up that says, hey, you want to sign up? Which is a good point. We now have a page on the site. If you go to powergroupconsulting.com/webinars.
The Powell Group Consulting?
No, just
you said the.
Consulting. Sorry.
Dang it. So I typed that in there. Powell Group.
we've got
There
a
we go.
dedicated page now for our webinars, and the two that we run every month is how to find a publisher and how to find an investor. And we just did the investor one yesterday, but next week we're doing another one of our how to find a publisher webinars, and those are completely live, and you can go to our website, sign up for it. If you can't actually attend live, that's fine, because it'll send you an email with the recording afterwards. So yeah, long overdue update to the website there, so people can get a little more knowledge in there.
Excellent.
All right, we will get all of these links posted up on all of these different platforms that we're on, and we'll get some Renee some more wish list for the game, whether she's ready for them or not.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate coming on the show and talking with you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Yes.
Same here.
Thanks, everybody. See you Friday. Oh, wait. Who do we have on Friday?
We have Alina, and I forget Alina's last name. She was the CEO of a big Ukrainian firm for years, and now she's got her a new thing that she's launched called Achievers Hub. But we're going to be talking about everything from the game development scene in Ukraine to what she's doing with the Achievers Hub, which is an interesting company because it's some parts publisher, some parts consultant. It's really cool. I met her at the show in Poland. And we're also going to be talking about why we're seeing less European developers coming to the US for conferences. I'll let you just take a stab as to why that's true. But yeah, so that's going to be Friday at noon on Twitch, Mixer, YouTube, LinkedIn, and something else.
Something else.
Yes,
Mixer,
something
YouTube,
else.
Facebook, Twitch, LinkedIn.
Yep.
Anchor.fm. All right. Thank you so much, Renee, for coming and hanging out with us. And we'll see you Friday. Bye, everybody.